Technology, diversity, wine, the redwoods, and everything in between. Welcome to the Northern California Bay Area, and one show takes you inside the real estate that makes it all happen. This is By the Bay.
Hey, what's up, everyone? Thanks for coming back for another episode of By the Bay. I'm Dan Anchetta, your host, and I am super excited to introduce my guest today, a longtime friend of mine. We were just talking before the show started, how long we've known each other, how we got connected and such. But this is Wick. He is the director of Permit Sonoma, which is the permitting agency and a bunch of other stuff that we'll talk about for the county of Sonoma. And you're the director of it, and you oversee kind of the entire project that's there. So people go to you for permits and a bunch of other stuff. So kind of introduce yourself and will you tell us what Permit Sonoma does on a high level?
Sure. Dan, it's a pleasure to be here,
It's so good to see you.
Fun.
It's been so long.
Yeah, too long. And glad to make you look young this morning. Whatever I can do to provide that visual contrast.
I appreciate that. We'll make sure we take a clip of that to begin the show, and that will be our first promo clip for you.
Excellent.
Awesome.
So Permit Sonoma has the charge of balancing environmental protection and sustainable development. And we do it through 5 divisions. We're the only creature of our kind in California because we include not just the community development model of planning, engineering, code enforcement, but we also have a natural resource division and a fire division. So we do all the non-fire suppression stuff in the county, including hazmat, arson investigations.
Wow. All of that falls under that one umbrella. Okay.
Natural resource scientists, so biologists, hydrologists, geologists, foresters. So it's a rich mix. It's a broad mission, and we have about 22 different licenses under our roof. So each one of those comes with a particular culture. So the fun part is making all of those meld and advance public interest. The challenge is making all of those meld and advancing a public interest.
Absolutely. It seems like there's a lot of different, maybe competing interests in a certain way of conservation and natural resources and looking at climate change and how what we're doing and building is impacting that, but also having the reality of we need to build houses and we need places for people to live. And not only, it's not just residential that you're dealing with, anytime you need a permit from the county for anything.
Right. Wells, agriculture.
So wineries, wells.
Cannabis.
Wow.
All of that falls.
So where do we even
roof.
start? I think so for the focus of this podcast, right, in
Sure.
this show, let's kind of start. We'll get into other stuff, but let's start with the housing kind of topic.
That's my particular passion.
Okay,
so I'm glad.
perfect. So how are we doing in the rebuild of everything that we've lost in the prior year's fires? Fortunately, we haven't had any, really bad incidents in the last couple of years. Right. But there was a number of years where we lost. How many houses did we actually lose in those incidents? Do we know?
Sure. And you can go to permitsonoma.org and go under performance evaluation. You can see dashboards there that are instantaneously updated with every permit change. If you went there, you can see unfortunately, we actually have this marked by fire. So in the 2017 Sonoma Complex fires that devastated and we lost, first of all, we lost 22 people.
Yeah. But not exactly. Let's not look over the fact that there is loss of human life, which is obviously first and foremost.
But it really changed our lives here in Sonoma County.
Totally.
We lost 5,300 homes overnight. And people will say, well, how do we lose that many homes in the wildland-urban interface, which we would typically think of as the forested lands and the hillsides in the county? But as we all know, that fire also came down, jumped the 6-lane freeway, and took out Coffee Park on the west side of 101. No one ever anticipated that we would have that magnitude of loss.
Absolutely. 53. I mean, I was here when that happened. Obviously, but I honestly didn't realize that was the amount. That's an incredibly huge number.
Yeah.
And that was just the first one.
That was just the first one. Then, it's still a loss of any home, of course, is significant. But in the Kincaid fire, we lost several hundred, and then several hundred more in the glass fire in 2020, the Walbridge and glass fires.
Right.
So overall, we've lost about 6,000 houses to fire in about 5 years.
And maybe you don't know the exact number today because it's an ever-evolving number. But roughly how much of that housing stock has come back?
About 80 to 85% of it.
That's a lot more than I thought.
Yeah, it's been an extraordinary effort. I mean, there's always been a certain tension, but also collaboration between the regulated and regulator communities. But those barriers just got eliminated, thankfully, after 2017 for a whole bunch of factors. And part of it is, we're still a small enough county to know each other, and yet a big enough county to get things done.
Sure.
And I don't mean the government, I mean the community as a whole.
Right.
And I saw just a whole bunch of personal and business practices that just became much more direct and collaborative. And part of, I think, the challenge for all of us, whether we're in business or in government or in the nonprofit, is making sure that those relationships grow and that we keep that progress.
Right. And not lose the momentum of like, hey, this is something that's impacted everybody.
Everybody.
Right. And so everyone rallied and came together, and how could we help?
It was extraordinary.
Let's change the rules and policies and help streamline the rebuild and make sure these people have a place of home. Right. And like, let's not.
And you see that. Right. I've witnessed it over. So for an example, we have a well moratorium now that I think was necessary. It was born out of some litigation that and it was initiated against the county, but I think the board made the right decision so that we could have the breathing space. In most places, I mean, water, whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting. We didn't have that. In fact, we have a group of stakeholders who are working with us in a pretty fast clip to find a solution to sustainable well development in the county.
This is really driven by the drought that we're experiencing, right, and the aquifer.
3 years in.
3 years in.
Another year coming.
Right.
Who knows how many more.
And the aquifer levels just not being able to regenerate enough water underground for people to pump out for personal and
the river.
And the river and commercial use, right? Because that's what's really feeding. We're in wine country, and that's where the water comes from right.
And despite the significant investments that Sonoma Water's made in environmental protection, overall, we still treat the Russian River as a very managed resource that's almost like a ICU patient that we're just trying to keep alive but not kill. And I think we're finally coming to the realization that we got to back up, take a more comprehensive view of it, and hopefully in our next general plan update that'll be starting in 2023, we'll look at the river. We will try to envision the river as what does it look like as a healthy resource?
Sure.
And then how do we maintain and manage that resource instead of constantly just extracting from it?
Is this something that's driven by lack of storage? I mean, I hear these different ideas of why don't we have ample supply, and sometimes it will obviously drought, just like the amount of available access to it, right? But is it, if we had more storage, would that solve the problem, or is it just
No, I think because the problem it's impacting species. It's probably one of the most complicated resource issues to unwind. But I think demand has flattened. So a lot of people say, "Well, why are you building more housing while we're in a drought?" Which is a reasonable point to make.
Right? Yeah.
But water use on a residential level, especially in the urban areas, is so much more efficient that if you look at the gross usage over the last 10 years, it really is pretty flat, even though we've added thousands of units.
That's interesting.
So it's really not about housing development. It's really about better use of the water that we've historically been taking out of the river.
So when we started, I was thinking, like, why have so much under this one umbrella? And just in this very first example, it's making sense to me already why
it's all connected.
It's all connected, and it's shocking to me now already that you're the only entity like this in the state of California that has such a wide spectrum of things. Because if you think about it, it really is all connected. Everyone has to understand, and if it's not all under one roof, then how do you really truly manage this huge problem?
And it's really, we experience it in the county government all over the United States. I mean, when you look at government levels, the real workhorse in the United States happens at the county level, where we deliver the social services, the infrastructure services, the housing services, and yet we do it in this super decentralized way here in Sonoma County with 27 different departments. So even your best days and your all close friends, that's a real hard communication and policy struggle.
Right. So how is that for you? Because you've not always worked for the government, right? You were in private development and doing a bunch of other things, and that's a whole other show that we can go down, like a 2-hour-long episode of the history of what Tennis Wick has done. But so this is relatively new to you in terms of like your overall career working for government. So how is that? It must have been a real big change to understand that.
In some ways, so it's my 42nd year of practice as a pro, about half of it in public service, half of it in private enterprise, and about 10 years with the county. So I jumped back into public service when Supervisor Rabbit came down to the farm and said, "All right, Buster, you've been complaining about us for 20 years. Why don't you come tell us how you'd make things better?"
If you have such good ideas, come on down.
Damn him.
Yeah, exactly. I should have him on the show.
You should. Be far more entertaining than me.
All right. So going back to that kind of overall housing. So we're building back the stuff that we lost in the fire, but that was kind of just to get back to status quo. We still have increasing housing demand. And I think that what the audience would want to really know is, what is the county doing to proactively help increase housing stock, overall places for people to live? So it's not just single family residences. Kind of give us the overview. And then in the context of, I know that the state has changed some laws. They're really pushing down on municipalities and counties, saying you have to increase your housing stock. And if you don't, there's going to be problems. And there's penalties and other things that they're gonna do. So can you give us an update about what is the county doing in that regard?
So let's if we could start with the rebuilds, because it does impact what happens so we are a sub-regional housing economy. And by that, I mean the 9 counties. Sonoma County is its own sub-region. It has, in some ways, part of the Marin housing market, Napa housing market does to some degree. But the fires really impacted us because it took a huge part of the private sector focusing on just those rebuilds.
Absolutely. And
that slowed down non-fire housing production because the entire design community, and remember we had bottlenecks not intentional, but for instance around geotechnical engineers. If you only have 5 in the county,
right,
in a complex geology, you can't bring in people from the outside. So we had to find a way to deal with that. And now we're finally, as we're coming out of that number, 80-85% done, the focus is now on the non-fire rebuilds and getting back to our housing challenge. We've been a pro-housing county for at least 15 years. That hadn't always been the tradition, but the last housing cycle, we actually finished above our state mandate of 515 homes in the unincorporated county.
Okay.
And that's really important to keep in mind because remember the social compact that we've all bought into since the 1990s, where all 9 cities have urban growth boundaries,
yes,
supported by community separators, supported by an ag preservation and open space district that acquires interests either by easement or in fee. And this is all voter approved.
Right.
So you can't change the scheme.
So let's break that down because I don't think everyone understands. Like I hear what you're saying, but so basically that means that the cities within Sonoma County have voted. This was, I think, wasn't Petaluma the first one? Didn't it go to the Supreme Court?
Actually, Dave, that was the growth management measure, but actually Dave King and I, when we were on the Chamber of Commerce, wrote the first urban growth boundary for the city of Petaluma.
So that basically means that there's a line, whether you know that it exists or not, there is a line around Petaluma that you cannot build beyond.
And around the other 8 cities in the county.
And because it's the intent is to not have a sprawling city that just keeps going further and further and further out into the farmland.
Right. Two major impacts. One, to provide that community identity, and that's why when you're leaving Petaluma and going into the countryside and then entering Cotati, Rohnert Park.
There's green space and farm and things, and that was done intentionally.
Yes, unlike other parts of the Bay Area where you're not sure where one city starts and another one ends. So that was one. And then one was to create certainty within the urban growth boundary, within the cities. So the reason why you see development going up in Petaluma at 3 to 5 stories is because those people who are investing in those projects know they won't have to compete with sprawl.
Right.
And that's important because we have, even though it feels like it's inexhaustible, we have a limited demand. So we have to use that demand efficiently. And that's why some of the cities in our subregion who are really want to do the type of development that all of our general plans call for. So in addition to all the measures we mentioned before, we also have general plans in all 10 local jurisdictions that call for city-centered growth, particularly transit-oriented development around the SMART train.
Right.
So if you keep building out, you can't build up.
Right. So it's basically higher density, more efficient housing
Yep.
that has direct access to public transit to reduce the number of cars and things, so that is more pedestrian centric, where there is shopping and resources and restaurants and things that are within walking distance, and making that be the core. Now, obviously, you're not going to take that model and put it in East Petaluma and try to transform an existing neighborhood and make it into, right? But
Not today.
right?
No.
But as we're doing these infill projects, empty lots and things that are being underutilized, that you can combine and you can be more efficient utilizing the space, which is good for the community, and also that's what the developers need, because they're looking for higher density so they can have a higher return. There has to be some investment, and it's a public-private partnership that happens there. Right.
And think of North Water Street as the most recent example. So getting back to the housing and the mandate. So that's the scheme under which housing is happening. So the state mandates used to be a 5-year cycle. It's now an 8-year cycle. We're entering our 6th cycle of something called the Regional Housing Needs Allocation. Of course, the bureaucracy always is lovingly creating all these acronyms. So RENA. And our RENA before, in the prior cycle, was 515 units. Within that scheme that we've just reviewed, we met and exceeded our 515 unit count.
At the county level, right?
At the county level.
Right. And then every jurisdiction that you just mentioned, they have their own numbers that's their own thing, right?
Yeah, and a lot of the cities did not meet theirs.
Okay.
So our reward from the state for being a good housing partner was to increase our RENA in the current cycle by 364% to 3,818, which I appealed to the regional body with Supervisor Rabbitt's support. Unfortunately, we didn't succeed because it was already very obvious that the state wasn't going to bend. They weren't going to listen, that their formula was insane, because it's basically mandating us to sprawl. And we are doing everything possible to keep those unit counts as targeted to a limited number of sites and to use them as efficiently as possible. So I think we're going to be able to do it, but it's really frustrating when so here we are, we create this framework, and yet we're stuck in this regulatory accordion where they say build out under RENA, and then under something called vehicle miles traveled, which is the new way they evaluate traffic impacts, is to reduce the number of miles traveled predominantly between work and home. They're telling us build in and then build out. And with fire safe regulations, which are a good thing, build in again.
Right.
So at the state level, I mean, it's been this way, but it's becoming more acute. They just don't have different arms of their government talking to each other.
Yeah, I mean, that's bureaucracy, right? And so that's the challenge, right? So hopefully once those mandates and stuff make it into your building, because you have a large oversight all under one roof, that you actually can start pulling levers and figure out what we need to do and what resources we need from over here and over there to actually make these things work. So at the county level, what type of housing are you seeing? Like, what type of permits are being approved right now for housing?
So our housing stock is predominantly existing homes that are being remodeled. If you look by volume, that's the majority of what we're doing. For the new type of development, we're seeing larger, more estate homes coming in. It's just a weird part of the pandemic and the change it's made in where people can work.
Right.
So if you're a tech exec from the city and you're starting to raise a family and you don't want to do that in San Francisco for a whole bunch of reasons, you can come to Petaluma now and really not miss a beat in your project.
Be on the outskirts of Petaluma
Yeah.
in the county, and they're probably buying land that is 1 unit per 40 acres or whatever that zoning is, and
building a 4,500 square foot house
or more, right? One unit could be a 1,200 square foot house or 100,000 or 10,000 square foot house, right?
It's wild.
Right. As long as they have adequate, water and you get it. So,
but we're also seeing another type of housing in the urban service area. So while we're trying to promote as dense a use, as efficient a use of those properties as possible, and one huge opportunity we have is at the Sonoma Developmental Center.
okay.
So that's the psychiatric facility that's was over 100 years old before it closed down in 2015 to 2018, and it's worn down on Arnold Drive, just south of Glen Ellen.
Okay.
So this place that was really its own little city with its own water and sewer plant and fire department, police department, is now being completely re-envisioned to be what I think will be an example to all of California of what a sustainable community looks like. These are slogans that get passed around a lot, but we have examples of places that use recycled water, have microgrid, green energy, have car share and other forms of alternate mobility instead of just single occupant automobiles.
Sure.
But there's no place in the state where it's all been brought together.
Fascinating.
So we are working with the state. We're very fortunate that the Coastal Conservancy has made big investments here. That's the agency that the governor has tapped for making climate action investments.
Okay.
And they want to have a climate adaptation center as part of this community that will have 1,000 housing units, not supporting retail and non-residential research and development, all in one site. I mean, it's an extraordinary site, 725-acre addition to surrounding parkland in the state and regional parks, open space trails, all interconnecting, huge wildlife corridor coming through. I think it's going to be a premier
that's
type of community.
That's fascinating. They're taking a existing site that has maybe a lot of the infrastructure that maybe just needs to be updated or whatever, right?
Or crumbled and recycled.
Right. Either way. And they're going to turn it into a kind of overall planned development with all of these different kind of needs and factors taken into account. So how do we make sure that it's climate efficient and that there's all these modern ways that people are interacting kind of built into the infrastructure, like physically built into it.
Right. So we know we have a limited road capacity. So looking at car share. So that's also reduces the cost for the working families. And we're really focusing on the missing middle housing and affordable housing and non-hospitality, non-ag jobs. So this used to be the largest employer in Sonoma Valley. With the kind of housing that could be appropriate for and jobs appropriate for from the groundskeeper all the way up to the medical director, who was essentially also the city manager and mayor of this little community. So we're trying to find that economic development component that will also provide housing for the people who work there.
And maybe you said this, maybe I didn't hear. Is there a commercial component where there's actually going to be like, industry that's happening within that community, or are those people meant to live there and then work in Santa Rosa and Sonoma and other places like that?
Well, there's certainly a need for housing for public and private sector workers already in the valley. So teachers and firefighters, but also service economy people.
Right.
I mean, I'm focused on the people that maybe now live in the Springs, 10 people to a one-bedroom apartment. The people who were living on ranchettes in the northern part of the valley and the hillsides, they're taken care of.
Right.
I'm focused on how do we get the housing for those people who are the workhorses in our community. that are just not living with equitable housing.
Totally. It's a huge issue, right? The equity in housing and making sure that there is housing stock that is available at a reasonable price that people can afford. The people who are working the jobs that we all learned to appreciate during the pandemic, right? That they have a place to live, that they're not commuting in from other places in the North Bay and spending hours and money on gas, and plus the impact on the environment when they're doing that, and just their wear and tear.
Which is huge.
It's huge, right?
I mean, we see all this traffic coming. I mean, you look at the housing models or the transportation models, and you can see traffic doubling from the I-80 corridor because people can't afford housing here. So a lot of our employees are living in the East Bay, out towards Sacramento and commuting.
Right. This is the down leg of what we talk a lot about when we have people who are able to work from home, and they have jobs that are based in Silicon Valley, San Francisco, and they're moving here because they don't have to go to the city every single day. Maybe it's once a week or whatever.
And good for them.
That's great. But they're coming here, which is great. But there has to be additional housing that's being built to kind of absorb those people and still have a segment of housing that is probably not desirable to that segment of the population, but is for the working class backbone people who are here in the service economy and doing that.
Right. People refer to the missing middle, and it's a term that gets thrown around for a lot of different things. But to us, that means the people who don't qualify for affordable housing, for subsidized housing, but can't afford the median income home.
Totally. I know exactly. I mean, I look at people's finances all the time. And
yes.
I'm like,
you know better than
you're so
anybody.
close to hitting this number that is the magic number where you qualify for different types of loan programs. You qualify for all these different types of things. And you're like, you're $1,000 off. But guess what? You're a penny over, you don't qualify.
Yeah.
And it's really unfortunate. And the numbers that are presented are based off the entire county, but you have to look at the entire county. It's it's different depending on where you are.
Hugely.
Right? So, the cost of living in Petaluma is drastically different than Cloverdale, right? Drastically.
And that's why we refer to it, as a hipster hit county.
Right.
We have 1 foot in the Bay Area and 1 foot in the Redwood Empire.
Right. And that causes a challenge because they're blending this average income thing and it just doesn't always work out. So what is the solution for that, the missing middle?
Yeah. Well, one of the things we're trying to do at Sonoma Developmental Center and throughout our housing program. So how do we get these 3,818 homes? To the extent that we can work with the design and development community, make homes more affordable by design, by literally making them smaller. And then more of them per site.
Right. More efficiently built.
Right. So we get that economy of scale that the builder says, well, I can work with you, but if you're just arbitrarily telling me to build smaller houses at the same density, how do I get to profitability? How do I reduce my risk in my investment? Well, by building more of them.
Right.
And by not creating housing types that can't be built here. As we often say that we have Bay Area housing costs, but not Bay Area housing profits. So we've got to use density as one tool if we want smaller homes that are affordable by design. And then we can look at other ways in working with affordable housing builders that have to go through a hugely complex way of attracting capital for their projects. But we are very fortunate that we have organizations like Burbank Housing here. It was actually created by the county government and spun off
to be in private,
an independent
nonprofit
affordable housing building.
It's so interesting how those funding mechanisms work. I don't know a ton about it. Maybe you can shed a little light, but it's one of those things where you have to have a certain amount of money locally, and then you get a match, and then you get another different match, and then you get this other pool of money that you can get from.
You get grant money, you get tax credits. There's literally a lottery for bond financing that's available from the state. So they have to, you'll hear people talk about stacking of finance.
Right.
And there are probably 3 times more components to an affordable housing project than there are to a market rate, which typically only has 1 or 2
funding sources, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
So
what other? So I think we talked about that through so we are building single-family residences in the county, and that's where we're seeing a lot of build, right?
And more multifamily.
And okay, so tell me about the multifamily. What are we seeing there?
So obviously by multifamily, we mean apartments.
Yes.
So we're seeing more of those in the unincorporated county as people look for, and we try to give priority to those so they can get through the entitlement process quickly, because we know that the holding cost of land is the real cost.
Right. It's interesting because when I think of apartments, I think like, hey, right in the middle of town, like right next to the grocery store, like that's where they're typically located. So I guess I never really realized that there's apartments, like large scale apartment developments that are happening in the county.
Yeah. So think about just north of Cardinal Newman High School, where there was kind of an old 60s apartment complex that just got leveled in the fire. So I call this owner up. He's never built apartments. He's only managed them, but good man. And it was on a septic system. The leach lines were actually in landscape strips around the parking lot.
Oh, my goodness.
So I said, look, I'm calling you because I want you to build a lot more units there. And he said, who's this again?
So, excuse me, who's this calling? Someone from the government wants me to build, like it's calling me proactively?
So we sat down and I said, our board is so pro-housing and they've delegated a lot of authority down to me to negotiate things on a site-by-site basis. So I sat down with them and said, okay, I want you to build this many more tens more units. And in return, here's what I want. And, we went through a bit of a haggling and then reached accord, signed an agreement, and he went to the front of the line. The site's now open, and it's beautiful.
Fantastic.
And it's right next to a school.
Right, that's great. I mean, that's such a great success story of like someone, I think a lot of the frustration as a citizen is like, it doesn't always feel like someone who is going to actually do something will just step up and make that phone call and like make it happen. And like you had the authority and you just did it. Yeah. And that is like, how do we empower more people in government to do that?
Well, you have my bosses. I'm really lucky. I mean, I'm really lucky. They have their disagreements, but when it comes to policy, I don't really have to guess what they want.
Right.
And they're telling me to go faster, be bolder, ask for forgiveness, not for permission.
I love that. Good. I'm glad you're in that position. You're the right. Like from what I know about you as a person, like they're very fortunate to have someone like you who's like thoughtful and gonna make stuff happen because it's been that way.
I'm a guy in the middle. I've got 5 great bosses in the CAO that support me, and I have 200 people who follow and push me most of the time.
Got it. Good.
Complicated family.
So we've got single family residents. We have this big development happening, like being worked on in Sonoma Valley. We have multifamily residential that's being built on a kind of site-by-site basis, and probably, as I think about it, as the land that borders directly against the city property, like the line that so there's opportunities there for higher density housing. Talk to me about like a real hot topic we talked about is ADUs. So what is the county doing? Because if you can't build more houses, there's just not that many. How do you take the current housing stock and create more residences? Right? Okay,
so we're managing up and managing down when it comes to ADUs. We used to so accessory dwelling units, also known as second units, as granny
all sorts
units.
of names, right?
Right, but a really we get back to more efficient use of land. So you already have a single family home on there. This can be an additional unit on the same property. 5 to 10 years ago, you had to come into us and get a use permit. You were thrashed by the bureaucracy and hopefully came out on the other end. And not surprisingly, we were only producing in the tens of ADUs countywide.
Right.
Cities and county. It was pathetic, honestly. And now that we have brought in people who are more thoughtful about housing, we've deregulated the process down to just getting a building permit, and have collaborated with Napa County and formed a consortium. And in 2023, you'll see it roll out with a whole set of designs that are pre-approved, and some of them pre-plan checked and ready for issuance and you can go and decide whether you want to just take one off the shelf or modify it. So we've basically eliminated regulation of them. We've tried to minimize the design costs, and now it comes down to the cost of building them. And it's still scary for people because some of these units, depending on where you are, can cost as much as $300,000.
Right.
So we're trying to get it down to under $100,000 or less.
I mean, that would be spectacular. On a prior episode, Ryan O'Connell from
Sure.
How to ADU was a guest, and we talked at
Great
length about the overall cost. And there's like grant money you can get from the state. Like there's a $40,000 grant. So if we can, by commoditizing in a way and making the process super simple, like just you have the land, pick which one you want, pull it off the shelf. Here's a list of contractors that we know can build this, and boom, and you get a $40,000 grant from the state. If you can get the total cost to be $100 grand, the economics of that change completely.
Yeah.
Because if you're looking at a $300,000 expense, and you don't have the grants, and it's time, it's money, it's energy, it's effort. It's like, why go through all of that to get $1,200 of rent or whatever $2,000 of rent? Well, hey, do that math. If you're an investor, if you're thinking about like your property as an investment that's making money or subsidizing, imagine someone who's like aging in place that has an existing residence.
And we're seeing it, right?
And
They're moving into the back unit and then renting out the front
it's
one.
so smart.
Yeah.
It's so smart.
So one of the really great things that, and I hate to compliment my next door neighbor, Dave Morrison, but they're doing some great things in Napa County with forgivable loans to finance ADUs and get that cost down. And so the best compliment I can give him is to copy him. And I'm working with my brother, Dave Kiff, who runs the Community Development Commission, who's basically the public housing financer and developer for Sonoma County. So I think we'll be doing the same thing in 2023.
That sounds, I mean, it's really exciting. If we can streamline the process, like I said, have the plans ready to go. We know who can build them, and we know what the general costs are going to be. And we have state money, and then you have some type of forgivable loan or something that happens, and you're doing it like there must be some qualifier that's attached to it. You're providing some type of housing for somebody, and that's why you're getting that forgivable loan. But that is such an exciting opportunity for somebody who can generate income from their residents, and provide a solution. And like, how many people out there have excess capacity? If you make it easy and understandable, there'll be a line out the door, people wanting to do this.
Yeah, and this is going to help keep people in Sonoma County, and not just the people who are moving into a property, but helping people stay on a property. California is not a cost-friendly place to retire. And they're, as baby boomers, present company included, are looking at what's the next stage in life.
Right.
If they can have this income, they can stay on their property.
Right.
And be close to the next generation.
Well,
why culturally, one of the many things I think we're learning as we become a more diverse community is that it's great to actually have multiple generations in the same place.
I was just going to say that. I was like, what? I have clients all the time, and this is the typical story that I see. Yep. They're in their late 20s, early 30s. They're either expecting their first child or just had it, and they're living somewhere in the Bay Area, San Francisco, East Bay, South Bay, and one of them is originally from Sonoma County, Marin County, and they have a decision to make. Where do we want to raise our child? And they decide, let's go home. And so what do? They get a gift from mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, whoever, for hundreds of thousands of dollars, because that's the only way they can really afford to be here.
If they're lucky.
Yeah. And the parents and grandparents want them here because they want to be around them. They want to see the grandkid. They want to do all this stuff. And so we see this generational wealth transfer that's happening. But like, I'm thinking about this as you're talking, well, why not just build another house and, build an ADU that mom and dad can move into and kids can move into the family house. Like, it's so smart.
And think about childcare, which is another thing where our society just leaves people, as you well know, with a young family. So I know from experience in our own family, childcare for a toddler and a baby is about $1,500 a month. So for a lot of people, it's a choice of, does one parent stay home or do they go to work and lose money for some reason? it's a really tough thing to do.
Absolutely.
So if you have parents who can help provide that, I mean, it just goes.
It makes so much sense.
Yeah.
And so again, I'm understanding now why their umbrella does what it does. And so, I just think that is really cool that, we're right on that. We're right there. We're on the precipice. 2023 is next month. And that is super interesting and great timing that we're having this conversation, because I think that I don't know of a lot of awareness around these things. And I'm really hopeful that, we could do some work on it and make sure that the real estate community knows about these changes, and they can talk to their clients, and they can, have those consultations where they're asking, like, why are you selling this house? Well, we're doing this, we're doing this, we're doing this. It's like, well, did you know about these other options? And make some connections within that community to make sure that they know what's available and all the work that you've been doing with, Napa and everybody else, to make sure that process is understandable and they can get their arms around it without having to be an architect or an engineer or, some other. It's something that anybody should be able to do.
And the realtors should remember they're part of this solution. We don't do this alone. In fact, I have standing meetings monthly with Norbar. So Ross Linscomb, Carol Lexa, and Lisa Badenfor, the four of us meet, and we go over all manner of issues that are impacting the practice of their membership. They review public policy. I get wonderful advice, especially from Ross, sometimes uninvited. But that's the wonderful thing about working with him. But it's a really good collaboration, because if we don't have people like realtors out there looking for those opportunities for ADUs, so it's wonderful when I get calls from Rebecca Celli, so many, Todd Mendoza.
Name drop some more people. Come on. Who else?
Steve Koza.
There you go. Some of my favorites. Keep going.
Tony Parrish.
There you go.
But what's great in coming from the private sector back into the public sector is half the world seems to have my cell number. So for those who don't have it, it's 707-799-7726. And I get lots of texts and advice all day long from people. I love having that connection because Mendoza will call me and say, I got this idea. And some of it's stuff we're already doing, but a lot of it's super practical, and it's stuff that, frankly, I'm not thinking about. So that's the way we're going to be able to do this.
Yeah.
It's just cobbling together a whole bunch of solutions
Totally.
for housing, because the greenfield stuff, the brand new subdivisions of hundreds or thousands of units, that's not happening in Sonoma County. In a way, thankfully. It's going to be a much more complicated and I think attractive solution here.
Yeah, I think that that is all good as long as the public and private sectors work together on those solutions. We understand what each other's needs and desires are, and that we work together hand in hand to figure out those solutions for the long term.
Yeah, and we've got to get more supply so we have more listings. So places like SDC, the Sonoma Developmental Center, that's 1,000 units.
Right.
It's not just the new units that are going to be built there. It's also the units that are going to be freed up as people maybe move out of where they are now and into those units. And so as you know, when you bring a large number in, that helps to free up, and then you have, especially because of Prop 13 and the way it locks people into properties that maybe they don't want to be in, if they didn't have that kind of constraint, it makes much better use of our housing stock.
We have that, kind of competing forces here. You just mentioned Prop 13. Also, people have very low interest rates on a lot of their existing home loans. So those are things that you have to take into consideration if you're going to move up, and you don't have the tax exemption, like being able to move your tax basis to a new property. It's a real challenge to go, hey, my taxes are relatively fixed at this amount. My interest rate is 2.5%, and I don't necessarily love my house, but the incremental difference from where I am now to the next step up is like $3,000 more a month, or like whatever the number is. Just make it, but it's a big number sometimes. It's like, I think for $3,000 a month, I'll stay where we are. And that just limits the kind of opportunity for listings and people moving up and entry-level housing and all these other things, which is overall not a good thing for the long-term health and success of the community, Because what winds up happening is you have a monoculture of people who can only afford X amount of dollars, and then there's no diversity, and then you lack people to work in the service industry, or you have to import them from out of the area, and they're driving, and it just makes not a good overall community like core. So I feel like we're just kind of scratching the surface. We got to do this again. So I feel like scratching the surface on the whole thing.
Sure.
So to recap, we've got single-family residence and multifamily. We have large development, and then we have like infill kind of ADUs, making better use of existing properties. What else should the people who are in real estate in the area know about what's happening at the county level through Permit Sonoma?
So
Yes.
last Tuesday, the board and the idea actually germinated with Linda Hopkins. So Supervisor Hopkins represents the 5th District, the West County. Super smart, energetic person that the rest of us are just running to keep up with. And she, we see the homelessness is obviously it's still a big issue in Sonoma County, and we see so many people who are on the cusp, who are maybe living in vehicles or are couch surfing. And her point was, well, look, we can enforce against it and chase the problem around, but that's not really solving it. Let's look at modifying our regulations so that we can keep people housed on private property, so they can, and also find ways of better supporting them with services from agencies outside of Permit Sonoma. And so last Tuesday, they authorized us, and we are now finalizing regulations that will allow people to live on trailers on properties, and with waterless toilets, if that's the best way to get them on there. With the rebuilds, where we were really focusing on getting people back onto their properties, we had this whole housing scheme, and it worked for hundreds of people, if not thousands.
So during the rebuild time, someone lost their home to a fire. They would go acquire a trailer,
Pull a fifth wheel
or some other type of prefab, whirled it onto the property situation, and you were allowing them to hook up to utilities somehow with some temporary electricity or some way.
Yeah. They could hook up to the electricity pretty well, and hook up to a well. They got to have an on-site water system, whether it's urban service or a well. And then the challenge was septic system.
Right.
A lot of cases, septic system was fine. And the non-fire rebuild properties, it's more the age of a system on a West County property, maybe super old vacation property that the primary home is being used as a permanent residence. And now how do you, without having to go through substantial costs of upgrading that septic system, how do you get somebody on there without causing daylighting of effluent? So use a honeypot service.
Right.
We saw very little abuse of that in the rebuild, so I think it gave us the confidence to say we can still protect public health and safety, and do that with this temporary housing solution.
And
while
is that
we're in this crisis?
a use permit, or is that just a count? Like how does one apply?
It's real. So we're going to go through this process.
Yeah.
We'll have early 2023. We'll have a hearing before the Planning Commission in January, one before the board in April. Meantime, as we're getting it up and rolling, we'll have a web page up that'll be taking people through frequently asked questions and best practices. But the idea is it's just by a building permit.
That's great. And then there's some type of process for someone to come out and make sure that everything's hooked up correctly and that you're all
there'll be an
good
inspection,
to go, and
there'll be
good to go.
Yeah, and we've done this for years actually with caretaker housing for people.
Right.
So we know that this works. My super kudos to the board, because they're probably going to be hearing from some constituents about, well, I don't, it's going to devalue my property value if my neighbor's doing this. Well, imagine what a homeless enclave is going to do. We've seen it not only has a human cost, but it also has an impact on people's property values when these things are popping up around the county. So that's not what motivates me. What motivates me is taking care of people. But if it can address both issues, fine.
I think that's great. Was there, maybe I'm making this up in my head, you can correct me.
So much is going on in there, Dan, that the rest of us worry about.
Thank you for that, Tennis. I appreciate that. Your concern is very heartwarming. Wasn't there like a tiny house village that was going in somewhere in Sonoma County? What am I thinking of that wrong? There was some solution for the unhoused population.
Oh, what?
Right?
Yeah, Los Gilicos?
You know
Out
better
off
than I
of
do.
Highway 12 when we had the Joe Rodota Trail.
Yeah.
So for those who, just to remind
Yes.
people, several years ago, we had a huge encampment that had developed on the Joe Rodota Trail along Highway 12
Right.
in West Santa Rosa. And hundreds of people, pretty decrepit living conditions.
Right. And when it started, there was no resources there. And I think over time, the people were like, hey, you know, there's like an environmental problem here. Like there's a
Huge.
human problem. There's a big issue here. And then it started off with, let's put some porta potties out there and have some people come down, some social workers and come down and help people and, you know, doing that sort of thing. And that evolved over time.
It did. And it didn't improve. We just knew more about the problem. But we also discovered rampant drug dealing, sexual assault, domestic abuse, and it was intolerable. And not just intolerable for the people on the trail that were unhoused, but also for the housed people that were literally on the other side of the fence from it, that had rats coming through their yards and all sorts of problems. We
Right.
don't need to go into
Sure.
further detail. So under a federal court ruling called Boise and a site-specific ruling from the federal courts, we could not move people and enforce their removal from the trail unless we had multiple solutions for each one of them and options
Okay.
that we had to review with each of them. So we got to that point with hotels, homeless shelters, but we also needed another solution. And the board just said, the regular government is not dealing with this well enough. We're going to declare an emergency and hand this over to emergency operations. Well, Permit Sonoma staffs the planning section in emergency operations
Okay.
during fires, floods, and now homeless emergencies.
Right.
So I'm extremely proud of our team. We, in 10 days, identified the cohort on the trail that we were going to try to serve best by this, which were women over 50 who were subject to abuse and assault, who did not want to be in shelters for those reasons,
Right.
where those types of
They're not safe there.
incidents. Yeah, they're not
Right.
safe. So we found someone called Pallet Shelters, and this was a premium home builder in northern Washington state that were people of faith. And Amy created another arm of their business to build these homes, 60 square feet and 100 square feet out of aluminum that were very durable, had solar power for cell phones, had a ceramic heating unit. Big problem in homeless encampments are butane tanks that explode. So it's a pretty wild existence. So they had only gone through one public agency to build these before in Tacoma. They came down and they use formerly homeless people to design these, construct them, transport them, and erect them on site. They have multiple teams within their company, so they're all competing against each other. So I remember it was pissing rain at Los Gilicos. We picked the site, we designed it, permitted it. That went pretty fast, as you can imagine. And
You know someone who can
Yeah.
influence these things.
we just got to the other side of the table and approved our own project. But they pulled down, it was pissing rain, really cold. And here are these happy-go-lucky kids hopping out in their Seahawks jerseys. We forgave them for that and just started building right away.
Wow.
And as I say, 10 days later, we had a community of 60 units there.
60?
And they're still there.
60 units still exist and
Yeah.
they're still being used for that purpose.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, we only lost 4 during the glass fire when it came down and tried to consume the site. And it was really great. We had within the county government, we have something called Creative Sonoma, which is a pool of artists. So instead of your number 4A cabin, they created just like the kind of magnets you put on your refrigerator. They could go on these aluminum cabins. So they did tiny home themes. So Abe Lincoln in a cabin, hermit crabs. And so people got to go up as they came in and got registered and assigned to a place, they got to pick the image they wanted. So
That
you
is-
go out there to this day and you'll still see the,
I'm gonna have to go and check that
Yeah,
out. That is
it's
really,
really
cool.
cool.
That is, I mean, what I'm impressed with, Tennis, by this conversation is just the range of solutions that you're involved with and how impactful that is to the community. And I don't think that people really understand what it is that happens in your department and
many of us don't either on a daily basis.
secret and how much like downstream stuff that you impact and your team, not just you obviously, but it goes from the supervisors, people that the elected officials, and what their philosophies are on things, and
Couldn't do it without them.
right. And David Rabbit's a friend, and so on, and so obviously understanding his approach to things, but it goes well beyond just setting up good policy. It turns into like taking action and making stuff happen and not going, no one's ever done this before, so we don't know. There's no playbook for this, so we just throw up our hands and go, I guess there's no solution. Like the fact that you found a provider that can come put this up in a couple of days,
God
you
bless
permitted it yourself, you figured it out, you got the community buy-in, you found the tenants, like showed them the solution. Like that is such a remarkable story, and I think it's one that everyone needs to know, because I still hear all the time in the real estate community, the government doesn't want us. They're such a pain. They don't ever let us do anything. They just say no. The first reaction is no, and I don't find that to be true.
Yeah, well, I thank you. It does start at the top with our board, and because if you don't have that standard there, you don't. And I try to tell my people, look, just be professional, be ethical, be efficient, and I expect you to make mistakes, because that's what those of us who are intellectually honest must admit that we learn more from making mistakes than having successes. We have more of them than successes, so hopefully we will learn from them. I certainly do every day. And I think back to how you measure that, and this is one of the things that made me proud to be in public service with the people I am. After we built Los Gilicos, I went back out because I always like to go out after a project's done, and I still go down to like Technology Lane and Petaluma here and see a community that helped build. But I went back out to Los Gilicos, and here was this woman sitting at a picnic table outside. And think about it, the backdrop is the Mayacamas Mountains, sunset, just beautiful. So I had a cup of coffee with her, and she just kind of sighed and said, thanks. And I said, well, thank you for making this place work by being here as a resident. And what's different for you right now? I need to know, because we're going to be doing this again. And she said, well, this is the first time I've had a shower and washed my hair in 7 years. Think about that, folks. And she just, to have her skin back, to have her nails back, to have her hair back, to have her teeth back.
Like to feel like a person.
Oh.
Like the fact that, yeah.
And to have a place where her dog was safe and she was safe.
Yeah.
And there are just too many Sonomans who are in that same spot that we've got to help. If we start there and just work up, we're going to be just fine as a community. The wealthy are fine.
Right.
We'll hear about first world problems, but there's a whole scale of us that need more help. And that's where we should be focused. And the realtors are a huge part of that.
Yeah. Tennis, thank you. I really appreciate you for being on, for coming on. We'll have you back sometime soon. Like I said, we just got started, but thank you for all the work that you're doing and for being a leader in this component of what the county is doing, and for influencing. I know you're managing up and managing down, but making sure that the people who can make change understand what they can do to actually do it, and the people who have the power to do it, understanding what are the actual things you need to take action on. And so thank you for having that leadership perspective, and for coming on the show, and we'll have you back sometime real soon.
All right. Thanks for the forum.
Thanks, Tennis. See you soon.
Cheers.
Stay up to date with Bay Area real estate. Hit subscribe now if you haven't already. Did you enjoy this episode? We love reviews in the Apple Podcasts app. We'll read yours on the show. Hear more shows about Northern California now